Conditional statements are used if we have a situation and we need to decide based on if that situation is true, we will execute one piece of code, or otherwise if that situation is false, then we will execute another piece of code. The most famous conditional statement in any programming language is the if statement, and it goes like this. So we say if, and after that we write parentheses and open curly brackets. What we write between these parentheses needs to evaluate to be true in order for the code that we put here to be executed. So here we can simply say true, and here we can type debug.log, so it will be debug.log, and here we can say this is true. Now if I go back in my Unity editor and try to run this, we will see in the console this is true is printed out, because as I said, this right here that we put needs to be true in order for this code to be executed. If I put here false and go back and try to execute, if I run the program, we will see that nothing is basically, printed in the console because, this is false and it will not be executed. Now we see that this condition here is false and this code right here that we type will not be executed. But what if we want to provide an additional or alternative piece of code that will be executed in case this is false? For that we can use the else statement and simply type else here, and we can just copy and paste the code here, and instead of this is true we can simply type this is false, like this basically. Now if I go in the Unity editor and try to run this, we will see that this is false will be printed out in the console, which is our alternative piece of code, which is this right here, because as I said, this statement here is false. Then else will be executed. Now in order to make this more clear, instead of writing here false, we are going to use comparison operators to compare variables to each other. So we can test here if 4 is greater than 5, for example. And if this is true, so if 4 is greater than 5 and that's actually true, then we will execute this piece of code. Otherwise, we will execute this piece of code right here. Obviously, 4 is not greater than 5, and if I go back in the Unity editor and try to test this, we will see that this is false is printed out in the console. And we can use comparison operators greater than, less than, so we can also say here if 4 is less than 5, in this case this will be true. We can test if 4 is less than or equal to, so this is the, basically the operator for that. And we can also test if it's greater than or equal to, or if it's equal to, but we use double equal sign. Not to be confused with single equal sign, which assigns a value to a variable, so use double equal sign to check if, the variable on the left side is equal to the variable on the right side. We can also compare strings to each other using the double equal sign. So here we can say, for example, if this string name is equal to the string name. Now this will be true only if, this string is basically equal to this string. So if I use capital M, this will be basically false. We can also use multiple if-else statements. So here, for example, we can check if 4 is greater than 5. Now if this is, not true, then we will say else if 4 is greater than 3, for example. And we can go on and on with this. We can check if 4 is greater than 2, so on and so forth. But you get my point. So we can, use multiple if-else statements in order to perform a check. At the end here, we can simply say else, and this will act as a default basically. So we can perform a check. So we can say if 4 is greater than 5, else if 4 is greater than 3, else if 4 is greater than 2. If neither of these are true, we can simply say else here, and this will be a default. And basically, as I said, if neither of those are true, then what's here in the else statement will be executed instead. We can also have nested if-else statements, and that means if-else statements inside of our if-else statements. So here where we are checking if 4 is greater than 3, we can after that perform another check. So we can say if 4 is greater than 2, else if, so on and so forth. So basically we can do the same thing inside of these if-else statements and perform, other checks. But keep in mind that, don't exaggerate. Don't nest if-else statements too much, or otherwise you will have problems. Now, instead of writing multiple if-else statements, which can get a little bit messy, an alternative is using a switching case. So we can say, for example, int a is equal to 5. And now I can write a switch and pass that a, which is an integer, as an argument in this, basically switch statement. Now, in a switch statement, we write cases in order to determine which code to execute based on the result. So here we can say, for example, case 1, and then semicolon, or excuse me, colon, and then here we write break. Now what we write here, so write here, or code to be executed. So here we can say code to be executed. So here we write the code to be executed. And we can, well, have multiple these cases. And we need to use break at the end in order to break out of the case. So for example, I can use this case here. So here I can say case 2. Here I can say case 3. Now, if one of these cases are true, so if 2 is true, the code here will be executed. After that, we need to break out in order not to go and check other cases, basically. Now, here we have our integer a, which is equal to 5. So here we are basically checking this is an alternative to an if-else statement. So this right here is basically like we are saying if a is equal to 1, else if a is equal to 2. Else if a is equal to 3, so on and so forth. So here I will just say 5, and this will be that case, and I can use debug.log, so not assert, so it will be debug.log, and here we can say a is equal to 5. So let me just type that right, so it's equal to 5, and again I need to type 2. And if I go back here in the Unity editor and run this, we will see that, well, a is equal to 5 is printed out basically in the console. Now, if I was to remove 5 from here and say 1, if I go back and try to execute this, we will see that nothing is printed here in the console because here a is equal to 5 and we are checking if a is equal to 1, 2 or 3, which is basically, well, not the case. In this case, we can provide a default state. So here we can say default, and here we can say break at the end. And here we will provide a code. So here I'll just copy and paste it. And this is basically the same thing as we did with the else statement at the end of our if-else statements. So if I go back and try to run this now, we will see that a is equal to 5 is basically printed, because here we are going to check if a is equal to 1, 2 or 3. If neither of this is the case, then the default code that we provide here will be executed.